we're beginning to add a lot of detail into our animation, and the number of keyframes that we're using and are creating in our timeline is going up. And it's getting a little bit of a challenge for me to really understand what it is I'm looking at. When we're only working with a few keyframes or a few poses, it's really easy to understand their function and purpose inside the timeline. Let me show you an example of this. If I was just to pan over here, yeah, here are all the keyframes. That's a squash, that's an apex, that's a squash. It's really easy to see and understand their function when there's only just 2 or 3 of them. But if we were to examine the number of keyframes that we have over here, just visually looking at all these keyframes real fast, which one are the extreme poses? Which one of those frames is the storytelling pose? I'd like to be able to keep track of those so I can understand which are the key frames and which ones are the in-betweens, the minor drawings that support the storytelling or keyframes. And we can do so quite easily by changing the keyframe type. Now, this is an optional thing to do. It doesn't really actually do anything inside the computer other than change the color of our keyframes, which I find to be incredibly useful and very helpful. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to travel over to frame 9, which I can visually see is the frame that represents the apex of the first jump itself. And I'm going to select that keyframe. Now, remember, as you're working with these keyframes, there's actually 2 different rows that we're going to see keyframes on. The top row, so the red one, if you will, this is the summary. It's showing you all of the it's showing you that there's a keyframe across all of your animation layers at this point in time. But it's not telling you which animation layer that information is sitting on. Okay? Let me cruise over here for a second. I apologize for the pan. Yeah, check it out. So here's the summary. Now, we know that we're putting keyframes on the bouncing ball animation layer. So this is the actual owner of that keyframe. The summary is just showing you that there is a keyframe. Now, if we wanted to change the keyframe type of any of our keyframes, it's really easy to do that. So 2 ways we can do that. The first way is through a keyboard shortcut, which is the R key. R as in Robert or Romeo. And we have a whole series of keyframe types that we can use. Now, these aren't really going to do anything other than just change the color and the size. I like using the extreme one because it makes it this lovely shade of pink. And then we select it, it's nice and red. It's just a small little difference in here to really kind of brighten and separate the function of this keyframe in the larger context of this entire system itself. Doesn't change what happens on the computer. There are other systems that will allow us to filter the keyframes in our viewport based on their type, but that actually kind of does more harm than good, in my opinion, and it can make a very confusing timeline for us to be working within. So if I wanted to, I certainly could go over here to frame 15 and right-click on this as well and do keyframe type from the contextual menu that pops under my cursor. So we can either hit the R key or right-click on the keyframe to set its keyframe type. And that's what I'm going to do real fast on all of these extreme poses. That way I can kind of keep track of all of them. And I can see them from a distance and really understand what it is that they're working with. Excuse me. Hit the G key on accident. I wanted to hit the R key, and there we go. Now, if you look very carefully here, the subtle difference in color is noticeable, but we can actually go in and start to amplify this and make it a really noticeable change. And this is something that I like to personally do. It's nice that there's slight shades from each other, but if I wanted to make it really red all the time, it requires us to go into our Blender preferences. Let's do it real fast. I'm going to go into the edit menu at the top of the screen and open up my global Blender preferences. And where we're going is under the themes section. Now, what this allows us to do is to go in and change the colors of any of the assets and any of the interface elements across the entire application. So buyer beware, you are physically changing the interface of your application. But there are certain areas that would encourage you to look at. So if we go into the dope sheet, which is technically the name of the interface element that we've been working in, and scroll all the way down to the bottom, check it out. Right here, we have keyframe color. Keyframe selected. We can change all the colors of the keyframe, including extreme keyframe selected, including extreme keyframe. So this is the color value that I'm going to change. And I'm just going to make it bright red. I'm going to leave the selected color this kind of salmon-y color, and you can immediately see the impact of that change down on the keyframes below. Another thing that you may want to do, and this is really helpful if you're working in a big high resolution display, is change the keyframe scale factor. Don't worry, You're not actually changing the location of the keyframes. You're just changing the size of the icon on the timeline. And this is also another really neat trick to do. Just to make them a little bit bigger, to make it a little bit easier to see where the keyframes are and how they're going to be relating to one another. So those are two ways that we can easily go in and change the system to make it easier for us to work and easier for us to consume what we've created on our timelines.